Hey everyone, welcome to Unfiltered Faith Sessions. Today, I wanted to talk about the Great Flood, fact or fiction. And, it just seems like this is pretty much a fire stick for comments and disagreements. And I guess maybe we should just get to some of the finer points of this. Today, I want to talk about the actual flood itself and, in part, what the flood was designed to do. So, the biblical account of the flood, if you want to read it for yourself, is Genesis 6 through 9. And the nuts and bolts of it is that after the fall of man, and Adam and Eve were kicked out of the Garden of Eden because they know good from evil, that from that time, mankind had became so wicked that God was disgusted with his creation and wanted just to wipe it completely off the planet, destroy it. And part of that was also that there were Nephilim in the land. And the Nephilim were creations that were made from intimate relations between the women and fallen angels. And so one of the things that it's said to create is giants. So the flood was an attempt to get rid of the giants as well, get rid of these abominations. And, a lot of people just feel like it's a fairy tale. And the thing about that is there's a lot of accounts. Some 200 cultures that have a flood story. And largely, they have a lot of the same components. A great flood overtook the world because their God was not satisfied with the way that humans were, chooses to wipe them out, and there's a family that survives. There's a lot, that's almost a component of every single one of them. One that we know of that often is referred to as, being a retelling, that the Bible is retelling this with the flood story, is the Epic of Gilgamesh that originates in Mesopotamia. But as far as we have it in Greece, I can't even pronounce these names, but 2 people survives the flood that was sent by Zeus. In India, Manu warns and destroys the world with a great flood. China has legends. You have indigenous cultures in the Americas, the Cree, the Hopi, and some others that I'm just not going to butcher. But, we have accounts from the Americas, and there's some from Australia. The takeaway is that there's a core pattern there. There's a divine warning, there's a vessel, there's a destruction, there's survival, there's renewal. Now, one of the ways you could look at this is that there was a great cataclysm that happened on the world, and many cultures witnessed it. That's one way you could look at it. Another way that you could look at is this a retelling of a happening because the world was repopulated by a group of people, a divine family of sorts. So, and then it's carried on as the peoples spread out through the world. That's ultimately that's really the only two ways you can look at it. Skeptic or not, or Bible believer or not, there's evidence that something happened and it's recorded in our oral traditions. The reason why I wanted to bring the giants into it is because it was the attempt. We always say that the devil is not a creator; he is an imitator in the Christian religion. But we also have to remember that from Adam to Jesus, that is also a record that is contained within the Old Testament. And that part of that is Adam to Noah, and then Noah beyond to David, and then on to Jesus. So we have to also realize that the giants were an attempt to contaminate that. So that was another thing that this is recording as far as the Bible's concerned, which is something that I don't know is very much a part of the other cultures, because Jesus wasn't such a part of those cultures as far as we know. But just a tail end on that. One of the things that is interesting about these other cultures, maybe we'll talk about that, is most every culture, most every religious culture's got some kind of a savior story that's coming along with it. But in the Bible telling, we believe this is Jesus coming back. And it also kind of differs from those others because we believe that Jesus came and died and ascended to heaven and is coming back. Where the difference is that these other cultures that believe in a Savior believe he hasn't come yet. So it's very important to note on the topic of Jesus and the spoiling of the bloodline. But the funny thing about giants is it says in the Bible that the mighty men of old were giants and that they survived the flood. And in the Bible, it mentions also that they had 6 fingers and 6 toes. Now that correlates with the Hopi and their depiction of giants in the Native American culture. Largely why they would want to see your hand among greeting you is to see how many fingers you had so that they would know what they were dealing with. So it's kind of important that the giants piece did not just, isn't just something that was talked about in the Bible, but it also was mentioned in every one of those other cultures. Every culture's got something about an oversized being. So I think that that's also interesting. There again, is it a retelling of one happening, or is it a happening that multiple cultures witnessed? And same thing with the giants. Is this a species that was all around the world? You have to look at those kind of things. It's very, and it's, like I said, the Goliath, which was a giant that was believed to be 6 to 10 feet tall. And that's just really depending on the manuscript tradition that you're reading from. But nonetheless, a pretty tall being. Because these giants had just been gigantism or some kind of deformity. And, you have these things. Like said in Greek, you have the Titans and you have Cyclops. In the Norse, you have, they called them the frost giants, or Jotun, I believe is what that is. The Norse translation is that they would refer to these. I could be wrong. And also, in a lot of these myths, the giants were semi-divine. Like you take the Greek Titans and Cyclops, they were the offspring of humans and gods. And in those times, I'm pretty sure you would view an angel as a god. And we can go into some other theories beyond that on another talk. But on this one, we can see that we're dealing with the offspring. And this really goes along with a lot of different cultures. So we have the biblical interpretation, and we know that other cultures have interpretation of this event. So you have this oral web that's going on behind the scenes of all these different traditions that are talking about this happening. But we also have some geological evidence that people cite for this as well. Thickened sedimentary layers that were deposited rapidly by catastrophic water movements, mass fossil beds, marine fossils on mountains, such as the Himalayas and in the Grand Canyon. We have global distributions of floodwater legends as well. For instance, like the Dead Sea, it's a salt. It's really, really thick in salt content, so that's why it's the Dead Sea. Is that it can't support life because of the salt content. You have the Great Salt Lake here in the United States. So you have these odd water distributions that are attributed to this as well. Even down to there's a regional mega flood such as the Black Sea flood. There's tectonic uplift, that we also have to consider. So what does that mean? Well, here's the thing. Here's what that means to me anyway. Having fossils at the top of high mountains that are for marine life, that is very compelling. The other side of it is could that have been due to tectonic uplift, where these were once, bottoms of the seas pushed upward? Could have been water redistribution. So what I mean by that is what about the magnetic pole shifts? We also do believe that sometime in our past that something like that happened, where the poles switched quickly and that caused a redistribution of water. We see structures in the oceans that are at the bottom of the sea. We've just off of China. There's structures underwater that are huge that baffle us. We don't know quite why they're so big. We have parts of the Middle East as well that has huge oversized structures that we really can't explain. We don't know why they're made that big, and they don't seem like they would fit humans. It just doesn't make sense. So we have a lot of things that we don't understand. We have the pyramids that we don't quite understand how they were made. That we can say all day long that we figured it out, but we still don't. We know that the pyramids are even older than we thought, and that's provable. By the Sphinx. The Sphinx is actually supposedly older than the pyramids, but nonetheless, it's all older than what we originally had recorded. And there's evidence of water erosion in the desert that just doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense for it to be that much. It's beyond your average rain counts that accumulate through a season. We have a lot that we don't know. So I would say that just to say that the flood myth never happened and it's a fairy tale, that doesn't really float with me at all, because there's a lot of evidence that we don't understand. And the thing about the ark is, well, it would have to be petrified for us to have any kind of debris from it nowadays. but something could have been built. It's very possible that there was something like that. There obviously was a major shakeup in the world at one point in time. You go into the Grand Canyon, one of the things that they feel that could have caused the Grand Canyon was that there was an ice dam that melted and it flooded and caused a lot of the like dinosaur remains, the fossilized remains, oil pockets, and things like that would have had to been covered quickly in order for them to not be absorbed by the earth. They would have had to been created a huge sediment layer over them quickly to cause that kind of a process. And some of the largest dinosaur fossil beds that we have are in the United States. And like I said, a lot of it's theoretical. Actually, most anything on this is going to be theoretical. We weren't there. But there's an oral tradition that's older than the science that we are hearing. So I don't think that it's something we should just immediately discount. I don't think it's something that we should just say is some kind of fairy tale. Disregarding biblical sources, we are finding that the Bible, a lot of the biblical history has proven to be true. The people did witness something, and it happens that there are extra biblical sources that report somewhat of the same thing around the same period. We have to remember that these were primitive people, primitive techniques of communication, primitive understanding of what they were seeing. So they would have had to describe it in the words that they would have had that would come close to describing what it is. And we forget that as Christians. We forget that the language has changed just in our own time. Think about how words have changed and differed. Think about how the kids talk today. We used to say in the 70s and maybe 80s, 90s, oh, that's cool. Meaning that we thought that was really something that was neat. All right, which is an even older term. But now the kids say the opposite. They say, oh, that's fire. Or they have another term. They even almost have created their own language, all in an attempts to confuse their parents so they could speak without their parents understanding what they're talking about, much as most of us did as kids as well. So language changes, terms change. So many of them we've seen in our own time. So where do we end on this? Well, it's really two routes, just like everything with the Bible. Everything with the Bible has two routes: faith or science. What we can see versus what we cannot see. The Bible's always been at that. It's a crossroads. Do you have faith or do you not? And we have to navigate a lot of things. I'm going to swing back to giants. A lot of the bones that we've found are not from giants. They're misidentified bones of other prehistoric animals. Even down to cyclopses. I've seen some kind of hoax where somebody was claiming that they had found the skull of a cyclops, and it just ended up being an elephant head. And the huge, what they thought was an orbital socket, was really just where the trunk was. It happens all too often. And there's going to be more. There's always going to be spins on everything. There's always going to be people who are trying to create hoaxes, trying to create likes, trying to become famous, rather than search for the truth. We as, believers, and I would say other religious folks that may listen to this, we have to look for the truth in what we read. In what we hear, we have to use discernment. And as a Bible-believing Christian, Yeah, the Bible talks a lot about using discernment. So keep that in mind as you look through the things that you see. But I will tell you this, and this is kind of where I land on it. I am a person of faith, but I also believe that 200 cultures can't be too far from the truth. Flood is a flood. So if a flood happened and we survived, and there's only one family that survived, and all these cultures have a record of it, to me, given the oral translations and oral passings of stories that get passed down, there's something to it. There is going to be something to it. But we know a flood happened. At the very minimum, we know something happened. We may not know why, we may not know how. If you are a non-believer and you were back in that day and a great cataclysm happened, you would think it was an act of God. In fact, today we refer to major happenings as an act of God a lot of times when we have great weather catastrophes. So don't write God off, but use your head. As a Bible-believing Christian, I have faith that the biblical account is true because of the oral traditions that have passed down a flood story. There has to be something to it. And usually where there is smoke, there is fire. Anyway, I'm going to put this back to you. I gave you my thoughts on it. Please chime in and tell me what you think. My email address is ufsessions@gmail.com. Or you can drop a line in the comments, and I'll do my best to research or to do another talk about it. But as always, stay awake, stay aware, and stay unfiltered. Talk to you next time.